Now, I know it's a cliche and they always say don't meet your heroes, but the XK150 is one of my heroes. It is a legend within the classic car world, and I've never driven one before, and I'm about to, and you guys are going to come along for the ride as well. I don't know what to expect. I'm a huge Jaguar fan, but I've never driven a Jaguar from this period, so we might have a few teething troubles along the way as I get used to its quirks and its driving style, but crucially, let's get it out on some really good open roads and see how this 1950s supercar performs. Firstly, I have to say that engine is an absolute peach. On this particular car, it's the 3.8 and it has been recently rebuilt and it's been mildly tweaked. So we think the brake horsepower is somewhere nearer 300 as opposed to the standard being about 260. So this car doesn't weigh a lot, and that's quite a lot of power for an old car that's still on 1950s brakes. So it should be quite an interesting driving experience. And the first thing I notice as we get underway is this steering wheel is huge. Now, if you see my previous video with the MGA, that also had a massive steering wheel, but this is a couple of inches bigger, I think. This is a left-hand drive car, I should say. There's very little room between my right leg, the gear lever, and the steering wheel. So I'm sort of having to perch my leg at a strange angle so I can engage first and second. And the pedals are very, very close together. So I'll do my very best not to accidentally press the brake pedal when I'm meant to get the clutch. But first impressions, really, really good. But that engine seems to dominate everything. And the 4-speed gearbox, well, that's just, oh, that is a delight to use. That is precise. I'm never in any doubt of what gear I'm in. The steering, as soon as you're underway, lightens up really, really nicely. It's quite heavy at slow speed, I just noticed, but that is to be expected. And this car is on old-fashioned thin tyres, which I'm sure grip levels aren't particularly brilliant in the wet, but luckily it's a nice sunny day here today, so we don't have to worry about things like that. And me crashing someone's very, very nice vintage Jaguar. But the cabin, well, it's actually fairly roomy in here. It doesn't feel claustrophobic. We had two of us in here earlier, and I was expecting to sort of be rubbing shoulders and rubbing elbows constantly. But it wasn't. It was actually all right. And you have got a little bit of a space behind me, which you can use as handy storage space. There's a little bit of headroom. It's not too bad. Yeah, I could do some distance in this, I think. The ride is firm, but I have to expect this is a car that was designed in the 1950s. It's 70 years ago, but it feels great. And now we're warmed up a little bit. Let's just see what that straight six sounds like if we just give it a little bit of throttle. Oh, wow. Key things to remember about the XK150 is that it was the last generation of XK from the 1950s. You had the XK120, the 140, and the 150 was more refined, larger, and was overall marketed as a better package than its predecessors. Available as a fixed head coupe, as this one is, or a rather elegant drop head as well. But I think the lines on this fixed head coupe are really, really pretty. It's certainly, I know everybody raves about the E-Type, and there's no denying the E-Type is a stunning car. But the XK is its bigger brother. It's his older brother. and everything the E-Type is good at, it learned from the XK, and it's a beautiful looking car. It really is a beautiful looking car. Say the interior is quite minimalist. There's very little that you need in here. To be honest, there's just a set of dials and a set of switches. There's nothing else to distract the driver. All the dials are mounted in the middle here. I just can't imagine what people would have thought of this car in 1958. It must have been like a spaceship going down the road. It's still quick even today. I honestly thought it might be a little slow, but it's not. This could keep up with modern traffic quite happily. Now, the buyers of Jaguars traditionally, well, they're often characters. And this car, and I think it's really important that classic cars tell a great story. And this Jaguar is no exception. It was originally sold to a client in Italy, who I believe was a famous author. It then, after several years, in the early 60s, I believe, went missing. It wasn't stolen. I must say, there's no record of this car being stolen. It simply went missing, and nobody knew where it had gone in that time. The car then reappeared many years later in Germany. It was then sent out to America twice in its life, before eventually coming back to the UK, where it's lived for the last few years and been thoroughly enjoyed. And I can see why, because this car is so enjoyable. You just don't get that noise in a modern car anymore. And this 3.8 XK engine is a legendary engine. It went on for years and years in production. And the formula was right from the start. It started off as a 3.4. This is the 3.8. We then went on to the later E-Types and Jaguar XJs that came later in the 60s and 70s, used the same engine, just bored out to 4.2. So it's a tried and tested engine. There's loads of people that can look after these, and there's kind of endless tuning available with them as well. So you can really do quite a lot with this car. And let's not forget that Jaguars of this period have their heritage firmly in motorsport. Even the badge on the back reminds you who won Le Mans several years in a row. This car dominated on the race circuit, and it does feel, although the XK150 was a little more refined and a little more grown up than its predecessors, it feels like a racing car in here. That engine note is throaty. The steering is sharp. This car wants to be driven. It doesn't want to potter around town. It wants to be out on an open road. So you could get this car as either the 4-speed manual, which I've got here, or there was a 3-speed automatic. And I imagine that really changes the character of the car and makes it a great tourer. But for me, the driving experience is always enhanced with a good old-fashioned manual gearbox, especially when it's one as good and as precise as this. I certainly wouldn't consider the auto unless I was doing great distances, because the manual's just so good. So the XK150 did differ quite significantly to its predecessors, the XK140. The 150 brought in Dunlop disc brakes all round, an absolute revelation for the 1950s. And I have to say, although braking technology has moved on light years, this car does stop good and sharp, and it doesn't feel like you're gripping the steering wheel waiting for something to happen. It's really quite responsive. You also had sharper rack and pinion steering, and I can see that. This car is not wallowy. There's no play in the steering. it's direct and it's agile, and when you're on those skinny little tyres as well, it feels light and it feels nimble, and then you've got that powerful straight six backing things up, rear wheel drive. It's a real sports car experience. The body of the 150 was also, it was taller, it was wider, it really was a grown-up version of the predecessors. It appealed to a bigger market, and a lot of these cars went out to the States or across the world. They weren't just building cars for Britain at this point. They were building cars to appeal to the entire world, and they did appeal. These cars sold in great volumes. So in total of XK150s, they built 9,382 of these cars. Now, 2,265 of them were roadsters, 4,445 were the fixed head coupes such as this, and 2,672 were the drop head coupe. So that you can see they sold really, really well. There was also 3 Bertone special edition versions built. They were prototypes and they never made it into production, but they are a beautiful looking car. But then so is the standard XK. It was of course replaced by the E-Type in the early 60s, a car that has gone down in legendary status, but the XK has got its place in history, not only in racing, but also in classic car history. These cars are sought after now. People pay really, really good money for them, and I can see why, because it's special. And for me, a car of this period should be an event every time you get in it, and this certainly is an event, and I have to say it's a pleasurable one as well. So if you're thinking about getting into an XK150 of your own, what should you expect to pay? Well, their prices vary massively, as do most cars now on the high-end car market, but bottom line, you're looking at probably £45,000 to £50,000 for a fixed head coupe example that will require some work, right up to 150,000 to 200,000 for fully restored examples. It's really in line with E-Type Jaguars now. The XK has come into its own, values have rocketed and they continue to rocket, and they don't show any sign of letting up. These are desirable cars. There's only a certain number of them in the world, so if you want one, you're going to have to pay a good price for it. So, does one of my dream classics disappoint? Absolutely not. It's an absolute marvel of a car. And I'm so glad and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to drive one and experience it, and also share that journey with you guys as well. And I don't blame anyone that uses this car every single day, because why wouldn't you? What a car. It's a really lovely summer's evening and I'm in a 1950s Jaguar driving on some great British country roads. That makes me pretty happy. And I've got that glorious straight six to listen to. Just the slightest blip of the throttle and the engine comes alive. It's just a delight.